it looks like that there is a realistic end to the Ukrainian conflict looming into view, and you can imagine the people who are in favor of this, which is people who are involved with it, people who don't want eternal wars, and you can imagine who is opposed to this, which is shitlibs. Very, very, very screechy women and camp men who want, for some reason, for Ukrainians to die forever in a war against Russia. And I just can't stand it. I actually really hate it. The Ukrainian conflict, I don't think people realize the scope of it so far. So we're going to go through some of the details. Before we do, though, Islander 3 is coming. So if you want to get an Islander 2 shirt while they're still there, go get them now, because you won't be able to get them again. I actually need to order myself one because I don't have a heavy metal one yet, and I do want it. Anyway, so the numbers are just horrific. And that's by any standard. Because you would think in the 21st century, war would be a much smaller affair. It'd be more surgical, more technological. It wouldn't be mass movements of troops. But actually, no, not in Russia and Ukraine. The common figure I could find bandied about, which is cited in this ABC News story, but it was also given by New York Times and various others, comes from the former prosecutor general of Ukraine, who claimed that around 30,000 Ukrainian troops a month are being killed or badly wounded, and that the Ukrainian toll so far is probably north of 500,000.
Wow.
Which is huge. I mean, this is leaving demographic holes in Ukraine's population.
Yeah, but the solution to that is immigration.
Well, that's a different story.
It's been announced.
Oh, is it? Oh, Jesus Christ. I didn't even see that.
No, it's been announced. Immigration. And you'll know where they're coming from.
Just don't do it. Anyway, so the Russians have suffered between 300 and 400,000 casualties, soldiers. To know the number of civilians and the actual number is, of course, very difficult at the best of times. But the point is, it is around somewhere of 1 million people have died in this conflict over the last almost 3 years. So you might think that bringing an end to it was actually a good thing.
Yeah.
Because I don't want millions of people to die in really, honestly, kind of trivial reasons as well.
But how have they painted the Soviet Union? And I use that word advisedly.
Go on.
Why have they painted the Soviet Union when it had all those countries as a buffer states, basically to protect the motherland? And when they were given up, they were told that NATO would not advance into those states.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin said this in the 90s, and he's been saying it ever since.
And they did.
Yeah.
They did, and they also put nuclear weapons into Germany.
Yeah,
East Germany.
I wasn't going to get into it, but there is a fair argument to be made that there has been a lack of respect shown to Russia's authority in the region.
Well, when I was at NATO in shape, sorry, I've got to
That's
just.
fine. No, go ahead.
When I was at NATO in shape, there were 16 countries in NATO. There are now 31.
Yeah.
The first remit of it was that we were a defensive organisation. We will never fire the first shot. Mm-hmm. And then we went into Libya and other states as well as an aggressive force. Yeah. So it has changed from being 16 peace-loving peacekeepers to the withdrawal of the British Army of the Rhine out, and also the Americans out of Germany, to now being an aggressive force. And
it's expansionist.
And unfortunately, they've broken every gentleman's agreement or whatever when it comes to Russia.
Yeah. So I just want to carry on rather than relistate the whole thing. But I'm not. Obviously, I'm not against NATO or anything like that. But there's no doubt that it hasn't been employed as it was meant to have been employed. And so anyway, getting back to Ukraine,
for decades now.
For decades, yeah. This has been going on since the fall of the
70s.
Berlin Wall.
Yeah.
If not before. So you can go to various Ukraine tracker websites to see how much money has been spent. It's hard to find a correct number, frankly, because obviously the number changes. But this one says somewhere around 250 billion euros has been spent. I've found other numbers which are sort of like $380 billion, things like this.
So is that the official figures?
It's hard to find direct official figures. That's the thing.
Yeah,
it's
because
these are all estimates.
An exact equivalent number will have been skimmed off.
I mean, this is just publicly announced totals. So from that, obviously, and Zelensky said something like half the money just hasn't arrived, and so it's very leaky pipe that's transporting this money to Ukraine, because people seem to forget that Eastern Europe is not just modern first world Western democracy. It's actually full of deeply corrupt states, Ukraine being one of the most corrupt.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we should want them to be involved in a war or anything. I'm not saying it was justified for the Russians to invade or anything like that. It's just when you approach these things with a clear set of eyes, you get a better perspective on the circumstances.
Well, I'm sure you'll find some of the money on Hunter Biden's laptop.
Well, no doubt. Anyway, so here's a map of the ethnic distribution of Ukraine. And ethnic distribution is always really well mapped out when you look at the languages that people speak. The blue is Ukrainian, but the red is Russian. Now, you might be wondering, why were the Crimeans so happy to become part of Russia? Well, now you know.
Yeah.
And you can see also there are other large areas in the east that are heavily Russian, some like 80% plus Russian. And this is a map of where the Russians have invaded and gained control of. So as you can see, the Russians are taking the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine, people who probably should have already been part of Russia anyway.
Yeah.
And so this is...
Don't forget, the capital was in Ukraine at one stage, only for a few years.
Yeah. But the point is there is an ethnic fissure here that is coming to a kind of natural settlement. This is not entirely irrational, and it's actually kind of normal that the Russians should be a part of Russia and Ukrainians should be a part of Ukraine, and the Welsh should be a part of England. Just teasing. But the point being, this is a very natural thing for people to want, which is why you had Donbass and what was the other one that were being separatist, because they wanted to be free of Ukraine, because the Ukrainians have an ethnic grievance against Russians, and not unreasonably so. The way the Russians have treated them has been terrible throughout the 20th century. So anyway, like I said, I didn't want to relitigate all of this or anything like that. Just basically, because there are going to be lots of people who only watch the mainstream coverage of this, who view this as something like Star Wars. Oh, the plucky rebel Ukrainians have been invaded by the Russian Death Star for no reason, just because they're evil and they worship the dark side of the Force. It's like, no, they have interests, they have requirements, they have geostrategic objectives they have to meet for the security of their own country. And if you want to understand these things, you have to accept that that's true.
Yeah.
So anyway, Trump has moved in and decided, right, this is just coming to an end. And finally, he said he was going to do this. Obviously, he said for literally months and months and months leading up, I'll get this done really quickly. And he's getting on with it. So I'll just read from his Truth Social post. I had a lengthy and productive phone call with Vladimir Putin of Russia. We discussed Ukraine, Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. We both reflected on the great history of our nations and the fact that we fought so successfully together in World War II, remembering that Russia lost tens of millions of people and we likewise lost so many. Now, this is an interesting perspective, right? And one that you simply will not get from the likes of Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, or Boris Johnson, which is to accept that Russia itself is a great country with a long history, and the Russians are sensitive to their own dignity as a people.
Correct.
This is one thing that the modern liberal, neo-lib sort of globalist just cannot accept. But it is a definite core part of the Russian mind, and why Vladimir Putin does seem to actually enjoy organic support from the Russian people, even though he's launched an offensive war. Right? Vladimir Putin, as far as they're concerned, I think, is defending the dignity of Russia on the world stage and making them a power like they used to be when they had the Soviet Union. And I think to the average Russian, that is actually important.
Yeah.
I think that if people were to say that this is like Entebbe Airport, where the Israelis went in and got their hostages back, people have to understand that the people that lived in southern Ukraine have been butchered and slaughtered by Ukrainians, Azov Battalion and co, for years and years and years. And there comes a point where, after the warnings and warnings and warnings by Russian Federation, that if you don't put your own house in order, we will. And that's what he's done.
Yeah. So I just want to hammer on that point a second, just because this is just, you could never imagine Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson or anyone else publicly accepting that Russia has the legitimacy to exist as a state, and therefore it should be concerned about its own dignity. Trump does.
And he also mentions that at some point they were allies in World War II.
Yeah.
They say we successfully fought together.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, that was more my enemy's enemy is my friend.
Yeah,
But having said that, the point is he's done two things. He's made this speech, but at the same time, he's told NATO that NATO is not a priority for the United States anymore. Sorry, NATO in the West, Europe is not a priority, and Ukraine can't join NATO. So that's been the quid pro quo to Vladimir.
We'll get into it in a little bit, because there are definitely forces who want it to, as unwise as that might be. So he carries on and says, we've also agreed that our respective teams will start negotiations immediately, and will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something which I'll be doing right now. So he's gone above Zelensky's head at this. He hasn't involved in this. He's taken his own action. I've asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of the CIA John Ratcliffe, and Michael Waltz, and various others, to lead the negotiations, which I feel strongly will be successful. And then he says that, look, I just want to bring this to a peaceful conclusion, which is fine, and honestly the sensible and mature thing to do at this point in the conflict. Like, a lot of people have died. Ukraine is clearly losing this war, and would clearly have been knocked out of the war were it not for the endless treasure and munitions we were pouring into their pockets.
And Boris Johnson poured petrol.
Yes, he did. He hampered a peace agreement, was it 2 years ago now? Something like this.
2 years and a million men.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. At the time, there was something like 200,000, 300,000 dead, and now it's 700,000 more. So well done, Boris. Anyway, so Zelensky posted on Twitter that he had had a chat with President Trump. Honestly, there's not much for him to say. He just says, yeah, I discussed it with him, and hopefully we'll get to have negotiations. Trump made some other comments as well, that he is on the way to getting to peace. He thinks Putin wants peace. He thinks Zelensky wants peace. And I want to just stop seeing people getting killed. And so they're planning to have a peace summit of some sort, apparently in Saudi Arabia at some point. Which
I wish it was Gaza.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It doesn't have a nice hotel there yet. So Putin had invited Trump to Moscow, but of course Trump was like, well, it'll probably take place somewhere else. Probably
neutral ground.
Yeah. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that Ukraine will not realistically enter NATO. So the Defense Secretary of the United States has ruled that out. He says, we want a sovereign, prosperous Ukraine, but we must start by recognizing returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is also an unrealistic objective, as is joining NATO. So basically, the way the map was, as I showed you a minute ago, is what it's probably going to end up looking like, but that's actually not a terribly unreasonable position, because, of course, the majority of Russian areas will just join Russia. Anyway, so people pointing out, well, hang on a second, he's doing this without Zelensky's say-so. It's like, yeah, because Zelensky has lost the war. This is what happens when you lose a war. You actually aren't in a position to negotiate from a place of strength.
Zelensky was a puppet anyway.
Well, yeah, I agree. I can't remember the name of the oligarch who funded him to become the president offhand, but yeah, he's a comedian. He's an actor. Like, he's not a great Machiavellian political agent.
I mean, I don't see it that way. Not because I'm going to speak necessarily pro-Zelensky, but because the whole thing, as far as what we call the West is concerned, is military support and also intel support to Ukraine. So that is what is being taken away.
Yeah,
sure.
Without that, Ukraine couldn't fight.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, Zelensky wants to be involved in negotiations, which is not at all unreasonable, and I don't doubt that he will be. But the Western liberal has been trying to advance Zelensky's position in the negotiations as if he's the one who has won the war. And it's like, no, he's the losing party in the war, I'm afraid. Yeah. And he's also not the party that has been responsible for where the wealth and the munitions have been coming from. So he's going to end up inevitably taking a back seat in these negotiations, because it will be between Trump and Putin, revealing to us that this was an American proxy war against Russia, launched during the Biden administration and prosecuted very happily by Biden and the sort of the West under his leadership, things have changed under Trump. Honestly, for the more sensible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fewer people die because of this.
And the people to blame are the people that now own vast tracts of Ukraine.
Yeah, no doubt.
BlackRock and co.
Yeah, no doubt. I don't even want to get into it. There was a US general in the 1920s who wrote a book called War is a Racket.
Yeah.
And Smedley Butler, and he's just so right about it.
Absolutely right.
So right. Industrial warfare is just a racket. Anyway, Zelensky wants 100,000 European troops as peacekeepers in Ukraine to keep a ceasefire guaranteed, as well as he'd like guarantees from NATO, which he probably won't get. But Trump has said that he will guarantee it, so who knows what that means. And this Hegseth also said that everything is on the table in the conversation with Putin and Zelensky. Now, people have been pointing out, BBC pointed out that the Europeans seem to have been completely caught out by this and outmaneuvered. So again, Zelensky didn't know what was going on. The Europeans didn't know what was going on. And suddenly Trump's on the phone to Putin and said, look, let's wind this down. Sick of this nonsense. Because people have got to remember as well, we failed to break Russia in the way that we thought we were going to. Yeah. We thought that what we would do is essentially just strangle the Russian economy to death so that the Russian war machine wouldn't be able to function and that they would just end up giving up the war. That didn't happen. They basically judo flipped us, which is why exactly. It's one of the reasons that all of your prices are shooting through the roof at the moment. The Russians have been preparing for this eventuality since at least 2014, and they knew that they had some cards to play, and they played them. And so, okay, well, we can sit there and say Russia bad, yeah, maybe, but also Russia source of European energy. And you all laughed at Trump when he said, why are you dependent on Russia for European energy? You laughed in his face, and look at you now. So just saying. Anyway, so various foreign ministers, diplomats, heads of state from Europe have been caught completely off guard by this. Europe's defense ministers had one common message: there could be no negotiation about Ukraine without Ukraine and Europe at the table too. It's like they're begging, please, can we be involved? Yeah. Why would you need to be?
But these people as well were the ones who didn't want negotiations. They were the ones who wanted to keep ploughing money in and keep the fight going on. So to say they want to be part of the negotiations they didn't want to be part of, it just shows where they are. You know, they're not interested in stopping anything. They just want to be a part of it. Yeah,
absolutely. The BBC say, after a frenetic 24 hours of US declarations, there is a tangible sense that Europe's leaders have been caught by surprise, and that they now fear being bypassed on any potential Ukraine deal and deprived of a voice on the future of European security. It's like, well, many of you only spend like 2% GDP on your security, or like however much below the NATO requirement for the spending is. So the US is carrying Europe's defense and has been for decades. And you know this. Donald Trump has been literally from the beginning of his presidency back in 2016 complaining about this to you, saying, look, you need to spend more on defense. You need to pull your weight. And suddenly when you didn't do that, are you surprised that he's just ignoring you when he goes to deal with Vladimir Putin?
Well, I don't think he's ignoring them. It's the left and the libtards have all been doing this. La, 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 la.
Yeah, they have.
Because if you looked at his record has been withdraw, America first, no more wars, and I'll even talk to North Korea.
Oh yeah, he shook Kim Jong-un's hand across the DMZ.
Yeah, and so anyone can, who's compos mentis in this, could look and think, right, Trump's won. What is he going to do?
Take him seriously. That's and this is exactly what Germany's foreign minister said. The call with Putin was very much out of the blue, and even if the US president had made it clear for months that he was aiming to bring a quick end to the war, it's like, why did it come out of the blue if you knew he'd been saying this for months? Like, why weren't you taking him seriously? You know, why didn't you think he was actually going to do something? But no, like you said, they were cooling their heels, basically, assuming, nothing's really going to happen. No, Trump's going to make this end in the same way he's just going to make other things happen.
And the same with Gaza. Hamas
absolutely.
and Hezbollah actually need to think, oh God, he means it.
Yeah, he's actually going to do what he's saying.
He's going to allow the Israelis to do whatever they want, and they won't be rebuked.
Yep. So, whether you agree with it or not is, go make your judgments. But this is probably going to happen, so prepare in advance.
Yeah.
Anyway, the people who aren't preparing in advance are, of course, running our country. Starmer's convinced that everything will work out just sunshine and roses. Like we're literally gonna be like North Korea on everything, just an archaic state.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it shows how what numbnuts knows about NATO, because it's you've got to have a unanimous.
Yeah.
It's a unanimous decision. The supreme commander is always an American.
Yeah. And if the Americans vote no, you're not getting it.
Correct.
And Hegseth literally just told you no.
Oh, yeah.
What are you doing? Oh, I hate this.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I
don't even hate him. He's just a moron.
But that's why they've actually started to form a European army.
Yeah.
To circumvent this. But of course, they can't even get that right.
No, of course not. But anyway, so this was a remarkable exchange on British Talk TV between Richard Tice and Julia Hartley-Brewer. And I just wanted to just watch some of this, just to capture the liberal class's opinion on what has happened here, because they are so stuck in this kind of mist of morality when it comes to international power politics that it completely blinds them to the realities of what is happening.
It's Russia that's killing people. If Russia stopped fighting, if Russia wanted to end the war, if Russia stopped fighting, Russia could just stop fighting. There wouldn't be a war. No one would be killed.
And that would be
hey,
great.
our job done.
Yeah,
well, why doesn't the West take that to Russia?
Ultimately, maybe that's what the negotiations
Which part of Britain? Which part of Britain would you give away if we were invaded and you wanted to negotiate
none at all.
Peace?
None at all.
Oh, so we wouldn't give away any of Britain.
But
it's okay to give away a bit of Ukraine.
Hang on, it's not us giving it away, Julia. Right? It's Ukraine, and
Ukraine doesn't want to give it away.
Of course it doesn't. But ultimately, as everybody said, it is Zelensky's decision. But ultimately, we've got to stop killing people.
If we were invaded and our close allies in NATO, like the United States, basically supported us for a bit, but gave us just enough support so we could actually not lose, but we'd not enough to win.
Yeah.
And after 3 years, whoever was president of the United States
You're in a stronger position
said,
for which to try and negotiate a solution.
So at which point Donald Trump, let me finish, says, oh, well, we're going to have a negotiation. We're going to let the Russians, whoever invaded us, keep part of territory. Just to clarify. Just how much of British territory would you be willing to give away in those negotiations?
On Northern Ireland, chap. Ultimately, in Northern Ireland, there was a negotiation to stop the killing. It involved horrendous compromises that lots of people didn't want to make.
We didn't give away territory.
We stopped killing people.
We didn't give away territory.
That's also correct.
We didn't give away territory to an invading force. That's a ridiculous analogy.
No, it's a completely valid analogy.
Sorry, who invaded Northern Ireland?
Wars stop when people stop killing people.
No, wars stop when one side is defeated.
Look.
Sorry, have you heard of the Second World War?
Yes.
Did we negotiate the ending of the Second World War?
Have you heard of there are lots of other wars where ultimately people negotiate a peace. Otherwise, you just carry on. How long are we going to carry on with this?
Falklands.
Yeah, Falklands we won.
Oh, yeah. We didn't just negotiate with the Argentina and give them some of the Falklands.
No, but there's plenty
Why
of
not?
other...
Why not? That would have stopped the war, Richard.
Yeah.
Why not?
Look, ultimately, we won that war, but there are other wars where it's a negotiated settlement.
Because it's not our problem. Except it will be our problem when Vladimir Putin thinks he can take any territory of any country in Europe that he darn well pleases.
And that's
hysterical, right? Richard Tice handles her really well there. He's exactly correct. You can see like the hysterical woman on one side, very calm, reasonable man on the other side. No, Ukraine doesn't want this. This isn't like World War II. Some wars come to a negotiated settlement, especially if you're on the losing side. This is why we didn't have to do that with the Argentinians. Tice just completely correct on this point. No, this is what's going to happen, and it should happen at this point. And the liberal sort of internationalist perspective, no, we've got to feed men into the meat grinder forever. 30,000 men a month are dying in Ukraine.
Why
not
is she
her
so
sons.
passionate? Why is she so passionate? You know, you just see her face. You know, this is personal for her.
Yeah.
You know, she is. You know, she's not being a talk show host here.
No,
you know, this
is a
personal
moral crusade.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and with other people's sons. You know, that's what really pisses me off.
Well, that 18-year-old went to Ukraine. You know, obviously radicalized by UK. He went to Ukraine and died on the first outing that he took. You know, and it's because of people like this.
Yeah. It's never going to be her. And as far as she's concerned, she wants that to happen so she never has to deal with it personally. It's like, no, that's terrible, Julia. It's terrible. It's a good thing that's coming to an end.
The actual better analogy would have been World War One and Germany.
Yeah.
And you see when you do an unfair treaty, what happens.
That's a great point, actually. I wish I'd made that analogy myself. It's a really good point, Stan. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. A fair settlement to Ukraine and Russia would be a good thing, and Trump's got a fairly good sense of fairness, actually. So
he has.
I he's not a pushover. So I'd be surprised if everything went terribly for Ukraine and Zelensky. But anyway, we'll leave that there. Just good to see that it's coming to an end. Right. Thanks for watching, folks. If you'd like to support us, come over to lotuseast.com, sign up for £5 a month, and then go and watch Connor and Harry's detailed breakdown of the latest Nosferatu film. I actually haven't had time to watch the film yet, but I did watch the breakdown, and now I really want to watch the film. It's an amazing piece of work. I think you'll really like it. And while you're here, go over to X and follow us at lotuseaters_com.